It is one of our leading stories this hour. There seems to be internal strife between ANC leaders, including those serving in government. In a leaked video, ANC Gauteng Chairperson, who doubles up as Premier of Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, can be heard saying a minister's days are numbered for his failure to recognize his crime-fighting wardens in the province. Lesufi has, however, apologized for his remarks, acknowledging that his comments came across as threatening. Lesufi's crime prevention wardens program, which is here in Gauteng, is yet to be given the green light by national government. Let's get some analysis now, and we're joined by Professor Duvenage, a research director at the University of the Northwest. Prof, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Can I kick off our conversation with this question to you, and that is, how much of this is really about divisions between ANC leaders within the ranks of the ANC versus the Gauteng Premier, perhaps desperate to have his crime wardens legitimized by very important ministers that sit at national government?
Good morning, Corey and listeners. Yes, indeed, I think it is both sides. It's all about the election of 2024. And if we look back at what happened in Gauteng at the local level, it is clear, and many surveys are indicating this, that the ANC in Gauteng is in trouble. Now, as a result of that, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi want to appoint 6,000 crime prevention wardens. Now, there are many similarities between these so-called peace officers or crime prevention wardens and what we had in Zimbabwe in terms of the green bombers that were used to intimidate people before the elections. And I am seeing this as a desperate move on the side of the ANC in Gauteng to keep control of the province. But in order to make these appointments, and if you look at the Criminal Procedure Act, Mr. Lesufi need the authorization of both the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola, as well as the support of Bheki Cele. And it seems as if they are not dealing with this matter in a proper way. But we can also see divisions within the structures of the ANC. Clearly, Mr. Panyaza Lesufi is part of a more progressive group linking to the EFF lines within the province. So there are divisions, but it's about the 6,000 crime prevention wardens.
Yeah. Professor, I don't want to lose track of a very important matter that you are raising here, and that there is a link to the elections. But I want to sway the conversation this way. The appointment of these crime prevention wardens, by the way, they are already on the streets of Gauteng. Now, I think it was in October, if not September, 2 months ago, where a story came alleging that these crime prevention wardens were involved in brutalizing a young man who ended up losing his job because he can no longer perform his duties owing to his injuries. And I asked the Premier at that time, because he came on the show, I said to him, are these people properly in the streets? And he was very clear that no, yes, indeed, they are in the streets, but they are still in training. And I said to him, but how can they be in the streets or on the streets of Gauteng when they are still in training? I just want us for a moment, Professor, to listen to the Premier's response, and we'll pick up thereafter.
You can't train in the boardroom, and you can't train in the barracks. You need to train in the act under the supervision. There are nurses that are not nurses, but they're in hospitals, being supervised by properly qualified nurses.
So who's supervising the wardens?
They are supervised by the police. They work with the police, they work with the traffic police, and they work with other law enforcement agencies.
So, Professor, if we are to not lose sight of what is at stake here, these crime prevention wardens, there does appear now on the side of the Premier to be a certain level of desperation, owing to the comments he made at the weekend, that a certain minister's days are numbered for their refusal to recognize these crime prevention wardens. Do you hear there where he says these wardens are supervised by the police? How do we know for certain that they are indeed supervised by the police if there is going to be a threat such as the one we heard at the weekend? Is there a level of desperation here?
Well, Corley, I have no doubt in my mind there is a level of desperation on the side of Mr. Panyaza Lesufi and the ANC structures within the province. And clearly, they want to create their own form of, let's call it a political militia. In formal terms, they will try to connect it to other structures, but the main question is, where will their orders coming from? And I have no doubt that it will be political structures outside of formal police and security structures he referred to. So this is a clear contradiction, and if there's conflict, as it seems to be the case, between Bheki Cele and Panyaza Lesufi, it is emphasizing the point I am making. But this is about politics, it is about the politics of survival, but there's a lot of what I like to refer to as gutter politics involved in this. However, in a way, there is merit in what he said, that I think a number of ministers' days are counted when it comes to post-2024 elections, and if the ANC will still be in control at that point. We have seen that there's an onslaught against Pravin Gordhan. I think Bheki Cele is a target in some ways, and there are other ministers not performing. So I am looking at major changes if the ANC is going to keep power. And I think that was at the back of the head of Panyaza Lesufi, who is one of the more progressive people representing another or a more radical category within the framework of the ANC, and is part of the renewal thing. And I think he's connected to Paul Mashatile with high political aspirations.
Can I tease out, Professor, the term you keep referring to, and that is that these crime prevention wardens are political militia, ANC political militia, I think you say. And I want to be also fair to the Premier of Gauteng and say to him, these are people that are supposed to help in the fight against crime because, as we all know, police are overwhelmed throughout South Africa because of the high levels of crime. And you only have to see that at just how packed our courts are in terms of people who are awaiting to hear their cases. So is the Premier not justified in fighting tooth and nail to have these people on the streets but properly legitimized, given the scourge of crime in South Africa?
Paulie, you refer to it yourself that these people are still in training. I think the Premier mentioned it also. And we know that in order to train a peace officer in terms of legislation, is taking you up to about 18 months for basic training, which cannot happen. Then there's a second problem, and that is the budgeting. That is not coming from the police structures, but is coming from the provincial government. So in a way, you are creating parallel and conflicting structures. If security in Gauteng is really the problem, then you follow proper process and protocol. Then you capacitate the police, you capacitate the structures of the relevant security institutions. You are not creating a parallel structure. And what we are looking here is a form of a parallel structure, whom I believe has certain political motives. And I explain this against the background of what I'm expecting and seeing in surveys with regard to Gauteng in terms of the coming 2024 elections, and also by using the 2021 local elections in Gauteng as a very strong indicator. And I think Panyaza Lesufi, as the Premier of Gauteng, may be in trouble. I think we are looking at a strong possibility of a coalition government, and that is why I am making the connection between this crime prevention wardens and the so-called green bombers that we had with ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe.
That would be extremely worrying, Professor, if indeed it were to be proven true. But let's come back to what this is all about. So, if you take into account what I said earlier, and that is that there's a young man who can no longer perform his duties because he now has to wear, I think it's called a catheter. He can no longer go to the toilet to relieve himself normally. And the allegation is that he was brutalized by these wardens. And then you add to that this element that there was unlawful budgeting, or should we say allegedly unlawful budgeting, including the appointment of these 6,000 deployment of wardens. That is good reason enough for the Premier to react and act in the manner in which he is towards fellow government ministers. Does that not make sense to the ordinary man on the street?
In principle, it is making sense, and we are getting the same type of reaction from the DA provincial government in the Western Cape, who would like to take over certain police functions on a provincial government level. But the difference between Gauteng and the Western Cape is the methodology they are using. We are referring to the budgeting, we are referring to the deployment, you refer to the misconduct of these people. When it comes to security and safety of people, it is definitely a concern. And we know in Gauteng alone, there are about 500 murders in a month's time. And police experts are saying that these wardens won't be effective as people who can prevent crime in the province. And it was interesting that Panyaza Lesufi, according to media reports, referred to chasing the criminals away out of our areas. In other words, probably ANC areas, I don't know, maybe predominantly black areas, I'm not sure. Chasing in which direction, that is unsure. But there are clearly motives behind it that is not above board. And that is an area of concern. And I think that is the reason probably why Bheki Cele didn't react the way Panyaza Lesufi hoped he will react and put this officially as a decision in the government gazette, because that is what is required in order to make this legal. I think there are legal procedural problems with regard to this decision, and this is creating the conflict between Panyaza Lesufi and a person like Bheki Cele.
You see then, Professor, what you are now saying leads us to the final question. Because if there are going to be legalese that are going to follow here, Panyaza Lesufi is and has become the public face of these crime prevention wardens. If they have been given money, he actually admitted that they are given a stipend and they are already on the streets of Gauteng, it means that he did things not in accordance with the prescripts of the law. Could his job be under threat here?
Well, if we are seeing ourselves and acting according to the principles of a constitutional state, according to the legal processes and procedures, there should be at least an investigation in this regard. And my take on it is there are strong enough grounds for such an investigation. But knowing the way the ANC government is dealing with forms of misconduct, and we can use many examples, only one context is the Zondo Commission and its findings, the ANC aren't acting against their own political elite. And as a result of that, and looking at the dire situation the ANC is in before the 2024 elections, I'm not expecting such an investigation. But in a normal democracy or constitutional state, it would have been absolutely an investigation and probably a suspension of a person if the case can be motivated as we discuss it.
Professor Andre Duvenage, thank you very much for your time. Research Director at the University of the Northwest.